morning representing not only one, but two organizations that have had a significant impact in my life. The first being Cigna. They've welcomed me and so many other veterans with open arms to their family. I also stand here representing an organization that has helped mold me into the man I am today, the United States Marine Corps. When I was asked to speak for this event, I evaluated what message would be most impactful for those of you in the room, and what would leave a lasting impression, encouraging you to take action when you left today. Throughout my 2 combat deployments in Iraq, I've faced more near-death experiences than I have time to talk about this morning. And since I left the Marines in 2007, I've often wondered why. Why me? Why did God decide that it wasn't my time? What bigger plan did he have for me? And I'm pleased to say that I've figured it out. It's to serve those that have served and help our military members find their purpose in life. So this morning I'm going to speak from the heart, and I'm going to share some stories about a few times when my life was spared. And my hope is that these stories help paint a picture for you of what my comrades and I went through, so you'll have some context when I discuss why my transition back into the civilian sector was such a challenge. It will also give you some insight as to what the prior service members at your organization have experienced, and to show you why they're such great assets. Now when I'm done, I'm going to give you 3 key takeaways that will help you retain and develop your military talent. My first deployment was to Fallujah in 2004, where I served as the driver for the company ambulance vehicle. Our company fought in Operation Phantom Fury to take down Fallujah. Now, even though this deployment was very eventful, the majority of my traumatic experiences happened in my second deployment. So fast forward to September of 2006, we deployed for the second time. And ironically, both times we crossed the line of departure into Iraq was September 11th. Little did I know, though, that this time would be much different. I was a corporal, and instead of a driver, I was a vehicle commander and in charge of a crew of 7 Marines and millions of dollars worth of equipment. Our living conditions for our compound, for our 30-plus members of our platoon, consisted of 10 feet tall, 6 feet wide barriers filled with dirt. And these were our walls for our 20-foot by 20-foot compound. Now keep in mind, this compound, we didn't have overhead protection from incoming mortars and rockets, or even worse, the rain and cold. We slept on cots, we had dirt floors, we didn't have running water, and the best part, our bathroom consisted of an old lawn chair with a toilet seat screwed onto it. We were pretty much in paradise. For 2 months, we patrolled the surrounding roads and deserts in an effort to shake up enemy operations. Day after day, we'd find IEDs that were planted, improvised explosive devices that were planted and ready to blow, but we discovered them before we were hit. It was almost daily we suffered mortar attacks. At first, the mortars would land 200 or 300 meters outside of our compound, and over the days, the enemy was able to walk these rounds closer and closer. I had just gotten off 16 hours of guard duty and patrolling, and I laid my head on my cap, and I was out. I was asleep. Not 10 minutes later, I was jolted awake by one of the loudest, most extreme blasts I've ever encountered in my life. You see, the insurgents were finally able to dial us in and landed a mortar nearly 10 feet from my head. The reason I'm standing here today, that dirt barrier stood between me and where the mortar hit. This was the first incident in my deployment where I really felt like my life was spared. Now, eventually, our time at the traffic control point was over, and we moved into the small town of Anna, Iraq, just down the road. And our mission was to provide a 24/7 military presence and drive out the insurgents that had embedded into the population. The streets were too narrow for our 14-ton, 8-wheel vehicle, so we parked our LAVs and we patrolled on foot. A typical schedule for a squad of 8 to 10 Marines and a corpsman were 8 hours of patrolling, 8 hours of fire watch, and the remaining 8 hours were for debriefing and briefing patrols, cleaning our gear and our weapons, hygiene, and if you had time, sleep. We averaged about 3 hours of sleep per night. And combat started immediately in the month of November. 1/3 of our company was wounded, including myself, about 40 Marines. The enemy was ruthless. We didn't know who they were. Enemy at night and from the next morning. On November 18th, around 1500, it was my turn to stand guard in the headquarters tower. And as I climbed the ladder up to the roof and began my 20-foot walk over to the tower, it sounded like someone had lit a strip of black cat firecrackers at my feet. And instantly I knew that I was under machine gun fire from my right-hand side. So I dropped to my stomach, shoved my face into the gravel that lined the rooftop, and waited for the fire to stop. Our perimeter of the roof was stacked with about two layers of sandbags about 2 feet high. And some of these rounds were penetrating and ricocheting through these sandbags just over my head. So I low crawled to the corner of the building and I scanned, and I popped up, returned fire, and on a berm about 150 yards away was a man holding a machine gun. He popped down behind the berm and disappeared. On November 25th, our squad had just finished 8 hours of guard duty when we started a foot patrol, and our mission was to search multiple suspected houses that might be hiding a young man that recently detonated an IED against one of our other squads. And as we headed up north on the main road to the next block, we were in a staggered formation. I was the 5th Marine from the front walking on the right side of the road. We were about 10 yards from the mosque when all of a sudden, all I remember is a black cloud of smoke appearing on my left-hand side. I woke up about 10 seconds later on my stomach, just confused and disoriented. Immediately, I screamed for Lance Corporal Curry, who was carrying our radio. I couldn't see because the smoke was so thick, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And my ears were ringing so bad that I couldn't hear if he was yelling back. So finally, when I found Lance Corporal Curry, I instructed him to call the Quick Reaction Force. Simultaneously, I popped a red flare into the sky to signal our guard towers that we were in distress and to let them know of our location. As we were coordinated with QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, we let them know of our location and how many casualties and who was wounded. We had 2 Marines that were critically injured, Lance Corporal Heron and Corporal Geary. We had other Marines that were wounded but still able to roll over and provide security with their rifles. Once all was said and done, we had multiple tourniquets on Lance Corporal Heron because he was standing no more than 3 feet from the bomb when it went off. And I still vividly remember those screams of sheer pain. Now, once QRF arrived, we loaded up the casualties, and about 8 minutes later, we arrived at the landing zone and loaded the wounded Marines on the helicopter. Half our squad was sent home that night, and the rest of us who were lucky enough to walk away with no shrapnel wounds walked away with grade 3 concussions and hearing loss. And as we arrived back on the compound in Anna, the corpsman evaluated us and looked over us, and they determined that my blurred vision, confusion, and hearing loss were due to a grade 3 concussion, and that for the next 30 days I'd have to remain on the compound and assume the role of corporal of the guard. So the day before I was due to rejoin my squad, 30 days later, was Christmas Eve. I was standing guard in the headquarters tower with Lance Corporal Orfatelli. I was keeping a watch on the front side of the building. I was watching a mosque about 75 yards away while Orfatelli kept an eye on the back of the building. As I stood there, my helmet strap was hanging down because over the months I had grown complacent. My eye was drawn to a sudden blast at the entrance to the mosque, and instantly I knew what this was. It was a rocket-propelled grenade flying straight towards us. Our tower was constructed out of wood, and on the outside of the tower we had about 2 layers of sandbags stacked about chest high. And above chest high we didn't have any protection. And this RPG was flying right at my head. And just as the RPG was about to fly into the tower and kill us both, excuse me, it curved down and struck the rooftop about 5 feet away. As the RPG exploded and it sent a shockwave through our bodies, I finally fell to the ground, and immediately we started to take small arms fire from an AK-47 coming from the same direction as the mosque. The fire had us pinned down, and as I regained my composure, I reached up and I cocked the M240 machine gun, popped up and started to engage the enemy. And that was enough to allow the remaining Marines to be able to get in position around the perimeter and engage the enemy as well. We put about 3,000 rounds downrange, and the Marines in the room will know that we love our rounds. We put 3,000 rounds downrange in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, and after that day, we never had another attack on our compound. Combat continued for another 3 months until we were finally replaced by another Marine unit. And our next mission was to move to the outskirts of town and patrol the desert, similar to what we did in the first part of the deployment. Our days were much calmer than they were in Anna. On February 27th, my platoon had just returned back from an overnight patrol. We heard a loud explosion in the distance, and these were nothing new to us because we'd hear them multiple times a day. But eventually we knew something was wrong. Our chain of command was acting strange. And eventually they broke the news to us that 1st Platoon, led by Sergeant Chad Allen, was on a desert patrol when they came upon some farmland. There was a pipe that ran down the property line of the farm and into the Euphrates River. And Sergeant Allen had a decision to make. He could crush the farmer's water supply and drive over the pipe, or he could drive over the road where the pipe ran underneath the road. Sergeant Allen, being the kind-hearted Marine that he was, decided he was going to take the chance and cross on the road. As soon as they began to cross on the road, they hit a pressure plate IED, which sent their 14-ton LAV sky-high and engulfing it in flames. Sergeant Allen was killed, and the rest of his crew was severely injured. Our entire company was devastated. Now, since we were at war, the very next day we were right back on the road, except this time we rode a little lower in our turret, and the complacency we used to have was long gone. We were laser focused, and deep down we wanted revenge. As we approached the border of our area of operation, we decided to cut west across the desert. So my eyes were peeled for the safest place to cross a dry creek bed that separated the road from the desert, a place we hadn't crossed before. Now keep in mind, we had traveled down this road hundreds of times and crossed in this area more times than I can count, so it was critical we didn't take the most successful path. Our vehicle dipped down through the dry creek bed, and just as PFC Maher, my driver, started to accelerate, something came over me. It sounded like someone was whispering in my ear, and I saw a penny-sized object in the dirt. It kind of looked like a piece of packing tape. So I yelled at Maher to stop, and he slammed on his brakes, sending our whole crew flying forward in the turret. As we moved back, I could see that our tire tracks had stopped just inches short of this object in the dirt. We didn't want to take any chances, considering Sergeant Allen was just killed the day before by an IED. So we called the explosives team and had them come out and investigate the area. So 3 hours later, they finally show up. I directed them to the possible IED, so they sent, I'm going to fast forward the slide here. They sent out their robot, which you can see up here in the top right-hand side. The robot's equipped with cameras and multiple arms and levers to grab, pull, and dig. And we could tell once the robot got into action that there was something buried there. 20 minutes later, EOD dismounted the vehicle. They approached the site and dug up a 2-foot-long pressure plate. It was 2 strips of metal wrapped in packing tape with a detonator between and a wire running out into the ground. Shortly after, they dug up 3 oil jugs filled with 45 pounds of rocket propellant. The volume of explosives, and you see up in the top left there, the volume of explosives were enough to destroy our LAV and kill all 7 of us Marines inside, and we stopped just 2 inches short. Here was just another example of our guardian angels at work. Sergeant Allen was watching over us that day. You see, we were only 30 days from leaving Iraq, and many of us, including Sergeant Allen, were only 60 days from leaving the Marines, and the insurgents almost got my crew on this day too. The Prussians set in hard for us all. By the end of our deployment, I conducted more than 300 combat patrols, 20 cordon searches, 100 snap vehicle checkpoints, resulting in the discovery of 3 major weapons caches and the detention of 20 insurgents. And finally, at the beginning of April, we returned back to North Carolina. immediately I began my checkout process from the Marines. In May, I returned home to Missouri, and as you can imagine, my transition back to the civilian world after all we had experienced over the last 7 months was a challenge. I'd often wake up at night and still think I was in a combat zone. I'd hear certain sounds, smell certain smells, and they'd trigger my memory. And it really bothered me when I see people taking their freedoms for granted. I was on constant guard and had a short fuse that would often make me lose my temper. On the flip side, I was thrilled to be alive and back home. I partied every night of the week, spent every dollar I had. I was on a downward spiral, and I needed something to get me out of it. So in August of 2007, I enrolled at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri. My first class, political affairs. I'm sure you can imagine how that went for me. I was a 24-year-old combat vet sitting in class with a bunch of 18-year-old kids who most still lived at home with mom and dad and had no idea there was a war going on. So I struggled for the next year and a half until I finally got my head on straight and made numerous changes in my life. Now, over the last 12 years as a civilian, I've worked for many organizations. However, there have only been two that have truly made me feel like I was at home and part of the family. Cigna being one of them. I'm blessed to have the opportunity to serve as a co-lead for Cigna's Veterans Enterprise Resource Group, Salute. We serve not only our military personnel, their families, but the community as well. So this brings me to my first key takeaway for how to retain and develop your military talent. Camaraderie. The definition of camaraderie is the warm feelings of friendship, closeness, and loyalty shared among a group of people or a team of people. In the military, we experience the highest levels of camaraderie. Why, you ask? As a team, when you go through challenging times together, specifically war, you come out stronger and your bond together becomes unbreakable. This is why prior service members can link up with those they served with more than 10 to 20 years ago and pick up like they never missed a beat. Camaraderie for military members in the civilian workforce is harder to come by, though. The bonds in the civilian sector are usually not as strong as those who served in the military together. Creating a culture of camaraderie throughout an organization is definitely a difficult task. It's not impossible, though, and it starts from the top. Leadership must inspire a shared vision. A shared vision to help people understand the value of camaraderie between service members and non-service members. Here's 2 ways to begin. Most of you are already doing this one, but make sure you have an active ERG. We call them enterprise resource groups. Some of you employee resource groups or colleague resource groups. It needs to be focused on military, veterans, and military spouses. Bring them together and help them create that unbreakable bond, helping your veterans feel like they belong. Now, don't forget to align your purpose and promise statements to include those that haven't served in the military, because this will help. We want to be inclusive of all those who want to support and get involved, and this will help bridge that gap. Now, the second thing is to launch a military/veterans mentorship program, starting with the new hires. When I look at my personal success, the companies that I excelled in most were the companies that had strong military recruitment, retention, and development. Getting teamed up with a fellow service member from day one creates that early sense of camaraderie and creates an early sense of pride in the company. Keep in mind, though, our military population is small, and you might not have enough veterans that have been around long enough banging down your door to volunteer. So it's okay to team up a prior service member with a non-service member, as long as that member has been properly trained and has a desire to give back to those that have served. But why can't a service member mentor a non-service member? I'm living proof. I mentor champions within our organization that have military backgrounds and some who don't. I'm mentored by a few with military backgrounds and a few who don't have military backgrounds. But guess what? We still build that camaraderie. Now for my second key takeaway, nowadays companies are succeeding at becoming more veteran friendly. However, and they never miss a thank you for your service. However, it's more than a thank you if you want your military members to stick around for more than a few years. Besides getting them connected to the culture, they need to be plugged into the bigger picture. What's our mission? What are we fighting for? What problem are we solving? And where do I fit in this puzzle? You see, in the military, we were always working towards some end goal, some mission. We supported and knew what we had to execute on, and we did, no matter what it took. We also knew what our job was. When I was in Iraq serving as a vehicle commander, I took 100% ownership of my actions and my outcomes, and understood that the actions of my crew reflected my leadership. Now imagine a prior service member entering the workforce for the first time and not having a complete understanding of what the company's mission is or what they stand for. What if they're never fully given ownership of the role because their supervisor is unaware of their skill set due to not having industry experience? Think this service member will stick around for a while? Probably not. This is why it's so critical to have a designated talent acquisition team that supports not only your veterans ERG, but also veteran recruiting. These TAs and the veterans ERG can educate hiring managers on the soft skills that prior service members bring to the table. So I can tell you this much. If you were to look at my military background and try to align it into the industry I'm in now, healthcare, good luck. M240 machine guns, 25mm Bushmaster chain guns, AR-15s, and light armor vehicles don't exist in healthcare. Now my final key takeaway brings me to this. As you're building camaraderie through your ERGs, mentorship programs, and aligning TA, it's important not to overlook community involvement. This is no secret to each and every one of you in your room. You're all supporters of, in my opinion, even though this will be my first time, the best marathon in the world. You and your organizations have taken a stand to support those that have served this great nation, and it shows, and I thank you. Consistent community involvement will have an impact not only from your organization as a whole, but your military population and the community. You'll eventually begin to brand your organization as a trusted advisor to current and former service members. So let me tell you a quick story about a time I got to take advantage of as a community opportunity last year. I was selected by Express Scripts to be a guardian on a St. Louis area honor flight. I was blessed to have the opportunity to escort a 90-year-old World War II veteran to Washington, D.C., here to Washington, D.C., which is my first time, by the way, to visit all the memorials. To say that this was a life-changing experience would be an understatement. It's created a domino effect in my life and the lives of many others. Months later, I wrote my first book due to the inspiration serving on the flight. And today, now I'm on a mission to help people rise up and attack life with the heart of a Marine. So never underestimate the power of community involvement within your organization. So as I wrap up this morning, I'd like to challenge you. And I challenge you to step outside of your comfort zone and give a prior service member a chance to prove their value. I'll tell you what I mean by this. It's not often that the jobs we had in the military will translate to the civilian side. And actually, the jobs we had in the military, we didn't have previous experience for those. We were properly trained for the role. Personally, I had never shot a gun before joining the Marines, and I ended up being a rifleman. I never had the chance to call in air support or shoot a grenade launcher in high school, but I was properly trained and able to execute in combat. You see, the competence, the ability to solve problems and work well under pressure are skills we bring to the table and can be translated into any career if given a chance. I want to thank you all for your support this morning, not only for the Marine Corps Marathon, but setting the example and leading the way for recruiting, developing, and retaining our current and prior service members. I'll be around all morning, so please come up, say hi, introduce yourself, and let me know I can help.